Hi everyone, we're going to be looking at the continuity errors in the film Dr. No, specific to the scenes around Miss Taro's bungalow. The first scene has Miss Taro answering the telephone as Bond calls her. This daytime scene allows some details like the two small slanted lamps by her bed to be easily noticed. There's a long history of deliberate continuity errors in the films. Deliberate goofs allow a filmmaker to get something past the paying audience without them catching on, at the same time allowing them to wink at their peers. As Bond drives to Miss Taro's cottage, we hear Miss Taro's voice over the telephone as she gives directions uh, to her cottage, Magenta Drive 2391, which is different from the address we hear later. Cutting to the scene of Bond going to Miss Taro's cottage, there's two things that are rather hard to see. There are 8 steps leading to the door, and there's vents on the right side of the door that are open. Miss Taro exits the bedroom to answer the door. Notice that there's a bar to her left. Later we'll see a turntable there, which is not there presently. As she opens the door, surprised to see Bond, notice the slats are all closed in the door. But when Bond walks through the threshold, you can see that there's an open slat to his left. This is one of the most obvious continuity errors. In the back left corner, there'll be a shadow that wasn't there before, as well as the birdcage shifts slightly. It's really not important to mention every little continuity error, but as I'm going along, I'll mention some that occur to me. Others I'll just pass by because there are really so many going on at one point, I won't be able to cover them. Miss Taro will be going into the bedroom to answer the telephone. Notice that the lampshade is now quite large. This is something like filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock loves to do. Take a small object and make it large, or vice versa. The ceiling fan in the bedroom casts a shadow behind Miss Taro on the wall. But when Bond comes through the door, the shadow of the ceiling fan shifts to directly behind him on the door. And then when Bond sits down on the bed, we'll see that the shadow now shifts over the table behind him. Notice the table lamp behind Miss Taro. That's the original size of the lamp that we saw in the very first scene. Filmmakers love to get something past the censors. You have to remember this is 1962. Filmmakers are not allowed to show the horizontal mambo in any way, shape, or form, but they're allowed to show, a couple kissing with feet on the floor or almost reclining, not quite. Terrence Young gets past this by showing Taro on top of Bond making love in the mirror by the bed. And then this transposes to just Bond in the mirror. A nifty way to get something past the censors. It's awful hard to describe what a deliberate continuity error is because everyone can have a subjective view on it. But what I like to call the 3-step mambo is that the director will show you a shot, go to another shot, and come back to the shot with something changed. It's just an old magician trick, and it works very well and very effectively. We're going to see many examples of this as Bond is now saying 2171, and that's a different address than what was given before. As they exit the cottage, they're now going down 6 steps versus the 8 steps that Bond went up the stairs to enter the cottage before. He's dispensing of Miss Taro, and we'll be going in to wait for Professor Dent. I always find it somewhat amusing when film lovers come up with all kinds of excuses for what happened and why there's these continuity errors. And this example of the interiors of the bungalow were done at Pinewood Studio, therefore that's why they didn't get these things straight. But as you can see on the inside now, the slat is correct where it wasn't before. And obviously you see now a turntable at the bar that wasn't there before. It's just something for film lovers to notice and to learn to appreciate. Knowing when there's a deliberate continuity error versus just one that occurs, That's not an easy answer to that. But keep in mind that even in lower budget films, you're going to have a continuity director, you're going to have experienced editor, experienced filmmaker. These are pros. They put things in because they want them to be there, and that that should just be understood. As Bond heads to the door, look at the light on the floor. It's bright and long inside the bedroom. But when Bond goes through the door, there'll be a chair in the way blocking, and there's a lot of shadow that wasn't there before. As Bond does the old pillow trick to make it look like a body in the bed, he puts a bedspread on the floor. It's relatively flat. Later, you'll notice that it gets bunched up. We're going to be covering the Professor Dent scenes twice because there's just a lot going on. But as Bond moves to sit at the chair by the door, notice the slant on the lampshade, and the ashtray that was originally by Miss Taro's bed has now moved to this table. In the close-up of Bond putting on the gun silencer, notice that Bond is no longer wearing a tie, and the gun is not a Walter PPK but an FN Browning as reported on the internet. As Professor Dent approaches the cottage, Bond will be putting down the stack of cards in his left hand. This stack shifts noticeably in subsequent scenes. As Professor Dent enters the room, the trigger hammer on his gun appears to be and stays in an open position as he fires the shots, only closing after he finishes and enters the room. Bond's socks will be changing from short to long, and here you see exposed skin visible as his legs are crossed. Notice how the cards behind Bond shift position depending on the shots it's shown. Also, when Bond puts down the light switch, the cord is all on one side of the table edge, and in the reverse shot, the cord is on two separate sides or two separate edges. The ashtray behind Bond now shifts position. The porcelain lamp behind Bond has golden rings that the golden ring faces Bond here, or it faces the bed in this shot coming up right now. This goes back and forth several times in the scenes. Notice the long socks now on Bond as he lights a cigarette, and this cigarette, the way they're showing it, the cigarette will disappear from view as Bond shoots Professor Dent and then magically appears in the ashtray. Doing a second pass through the Professor Dent scenes, one of my favorite continuity error is Bond sits down to play a game of solitaire, and there is a shadow of the fan almost directly down over the cards. Well, I don't know what the light source is that allows that to happen, but I find that interesting. But the real continuity error is the speed of the fan. It is so much slower than the other established shots, making it for a fun and interesting continuity error. Now shifting to Professor Dent's side of the room, when Professor Dent fires at the pillow on the bed, there are two holes in the sheet as he fires his first shot. There's also a chair by the deck that shifts position, and there's clothing draped over the chair that also shift position. Professor Dent, behind him there's a mirror, there'll be a red tassel in the mirror, and then in the next shot the tassel will not be shown. The box on the coffee table is shifted, allowing Dent to sit down, but pay attention to his left and right hands. As we move from Bond back to Dent, we notice that his left hand is now further back than it was before. Now the business of the gun, moving closer to Dent and then looking further away in another scene. Now his Dent's right hand will be clenched. Just a lot going on as we move back and forth between Bond and Dent. The light switch cord is near the ashtray by Bond's right hand, but another shot will show it actually wrapped around the ashtray as we go to a secondary shot. As Bond shoots, notice that we have a bright steel gun for the moment, and then shifts back to a dark gunmetal. Naturally, primarily, film lovers should be enveloped in the film and just be taken up and swept away with the film, not worried about continuity errors. But it is part of the filmmaker's art, and with that, awareness, hopefully you'll be able to spot these things more and more and enjoy them.